Y'all may be seated. I got to tell you, man, there's just something special about having just the rest of our family with us today, just praising the Lord in two different languages. Would y'all say amen to that? Amen. I have to tell you, I know I have said this before, but it just gives us this little glimpse into heaven about what it'll be like standing before the throne with all tribes, all tongues, all nations, worshiping God together. And friends, I just believe that that's what we're supposed to be doing. Amen? So I've had quite a week. So I'll just go ahead and tell you, if you tried to contact me this week and I haven't responded, I have a good reason. Wednesday morning, I get the call from my son-in-law, or my son, who said, well, of course, true to form, he calls and kind of like his dad says, hey, what's up? I said, nothing. He said, what are you doing? I said, man, I'm at the church. Why? It's time. It's time for what? We're on the way to the hospital. Or no, actually, we're at the hospital. We've cleared triage. We're on the way to labor and delivery. And so about then, I want you to imagine a chicken with no head, because that's what I essentially became. And the girls were making fun of me because apparently I went into a silly mode, but I was just so excited. We drove down to San Antonio, and everything was progressing along just fine. Jennifer, my daughter-in-law, was just such a trooper. Stephen McCrae was born at 9:05 on Wednesday. Yes, give the Lord glory for that. But a lesson in humility, because he ended up in NICU. His oxygen levels would not get where they needed to be, and just a real feeling of helplessness for me, because all this stuff that I know and can do, it's Stephen's path. And it was just such an amazing thing. Word is, I'm waiting to hear from him this morning. For the first time in probably 8 years, I have not turned my phone off in church. And so I am not going to be rude. If it rings, you all just talk amongst yourselves. I'm going to visit with Stephen for a couple of minutes. But I think he'll text me. But he's supposed to get out of NICU last night and perhaps go home today. And Shannon, are you ready? You have to take the other thing off. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen McCrae. Yes, so let's talk about that for just a minute, okay? So I want to be grandpa. Now listen, if your name's Poopa or whatever it is, nothing against you. I don't want it. My daughters have determined that Christine and I should be Chip and Salsa. And I'm in disagreement with that. They said, well, but the grandchild gets to pick. And I said, that's not actually accurate. The first grandchild picks and the rest of them learn it, which tells us that they're perfectly capable of learning to say grandpa out of the chute. Amen? And so grandpa it will be. And so we're just so excited. Stephen and Jennifer have just been amazing. I'm so proud of my son. Yes. So let's have a message today, shall we? The irony of this, you can go ahead and I can't preach with that up there. I'm just going to be honest with you. That won't help either. Okay. I will tell you, first of all, I've been pastor here at Fellowship for 8.5 years. I have never repeated a sermon. And I have other pastors ask me, dude, you can repeat them like every 3 years. I just can't do that, except for this one. This message, I think this will be the 5th time I've given this message. And I give this message every couple of years because it is some insight into my own failures and my inabilities as a young dad and a young husband to actually provide for my family. So it was a hard time. I don't think it's any accident that coming off the week that I had, where I had absolutely no control over what was going on with my grandson, that this is the week that God laid me this message on my heart to provide again. So we're going to begin back in 1995. Connor is, at this point, she is about 5 months old. I'm landscaping for a company. Christina and I together are knocking down about $750, $800 a week. And every week is a struggle. I mean, there was never enough whatsoever. But we were trying. We were making all the right mistakes. Does that make sense if I say it? We were making all the right mistakes. And it was a Friday, right after Memorial Day, and Friday was payday, and Friday was the day that I got to go to the ATM and get my $40 weekly allowance. And we always went to the same place because when that meant I got to eat out for lunch that day. And, I don't know if y'all have ever lived that life, but it was kind of special. I got to eat out that day. And so we would go to this one little restaurant that had an ATM machine in it. And so I go to this little restaurant, and actually there was a restaurant, little Mexican food place, Valero, and then actually a Frost Bank right on the corner. And so, but I would go in here and I would put my card in, get some money. So this particular Friday, I go in and I put my card in and enter my PIN and ask for the $40, and it says insufficient funds. And so I take the card out and I try to put money on the card by going like this. Do y'all ever do that? For some reason, if we wipe it off, we think that adds money to the card. Amen? If you've ever done that, say I've done that. Or perhaps there's some grit on the card that caused my money to not be in the account or something like that. And so I do that. And so I put the card back in, punch in my codes and all that other stuff, and it says insufficient funds. Now, my first response is to be mad at Christina. I'm just being honest. My first response is to go, what has she done now? She's out spending money, blah, blah, blah. And so I'm just being honest with you. I call Christina, and I don't ask. I just begin accusing. I said, what are you doing? What money are you spending that there's no money? Honey, I've not done anything. You had to have done something because there's no money and I can't get my $40 and I can't even have lunch because I did blah, 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 blah. And she is sitting there trying to tell me I didn't do anything. Well, we happened to bank at Frost Bank. And so I just walked over there to the bank. I'm standing in line. It's a Friday. And if you guys remember Fridays on paydays, the line is out the door. And the longer I stand in line, just the more wound up I get. So I finally get to the front and I said, ma'am, there is something wrong with our accounts. You guys have made a mistake. You guys have done something wrong. And like this, and she pulls up my account. She said, well, Mr. Wright, it's not us. You're $5,000 overdrawn. And my first thought was, I've never even had $5,000 yet to even be over. I said, no, ma'am, we're not overdrawn. She goes, yes, sir, I'm looking at your account. You've been going to, back then there at Circuit City, we still existed. You've been going to Circuit City. It looks like Toys R Us and Home Depot for the last week. And you're $5,000 overdrawn. As a matter of fact, you're probably going to start getting there. I said, ma'am, we don't do that. She said, I have copies of the checks right here. And she flips the screen around. I said, that's not my signature. And she goes, what? I said, that's not my signature. And so she's able to pull up my signature card on her screen. She goes, oh, that's not your signature. And it wasn't even close. And so we begin this long process. First of all, we're $5,000 overdrawn with an infant at home, and we don't have stuff stored up at the house. Do you know what I'm saying? And so this panic mode begins to set in. I mean, it just begins to set in with us. Just to sort of shorten things up, what we found out was that 2 weeks before, my buddy's truck was broken into, and I had a checkbook in there. And he had told me that his truck had been broken into, but it never clicked with me that my checkbook was in there. And being the brilliant rocket surgeon that I was, I had actually left one of my temporary driver's licenses in the checkbook. Y'all see where this is going. And so whoever broke into the truck was able to go somewhere with this temporary driver's license and just write checks all over town. I will tell you this, Frost Bank was awesome. It took about a week for us to get money back. The next day they gave us enough to actually buy food with. And we actually spent the next 10 years fighting this. I mean, it was horrific. I mean, at points there were warrants out for my arrest for writing hot checks because these people, and we to this day have, I don't know, it's probably an inch thick, a file folder full of affidavits that we had to go through and sign at all these different places. It was just a nightmare. But here's the lesson. I was not prepared to provide for my family if something were to happen. Did I learn my lesson? I did not. So in 1999, we're now living in Georgetown. I'm working for Austin EMS, and I'm a commander there. And they come in and say, we want you to go to Russia. And I thought, well, that's just awesome. I get to go to Russia. And so I got to go to Russia, and I spent a little over 3 weeks teaching Russian doctors how to be paramedics. And it was a really cool experience. Now, back then, many of you will remember this, but Russia was just coming out of perestroika. They still, and I don't even think today they actually have a banking industry, but we had to carry cash for everything. And so they gave each one of us a little over $9,500 in cash to carry over to Russia in order to pay for hotels and food, and actually translators was our biggest issue. When we get over to Russia, instead of staying in one of the hotels in downtown Moscow, they put us up in a government hotel. So instead of paying $250 a night, we were paying about $30 a night. The result of that is that we each had about $4,200 excess cash when we came home. Now remember, that money does not belong to me, that belongs to the city of Austin. And the city of Austin, if you've ever dealt with them, they like their money. And so we get back, and I'm asking my boss who had gone on the trip, he's actually chief of the department, when we turn this in, he goes, we can't, because see, all the money was actually in one pot. Does that make sense? It was all in one pot, but we each had been assigned certain parts. He said, we can't do our expense report until I get my phone bill in, because he had to make a lot of calls. It ended up being $900 worth of calls, so I understood. But we can't do our expense report. Well, what do you want me to do with this money? Just hold on to it, and then when the time comes, we'll put it all together and file the expense report. And I think, well, he's the chief of EMS. He should know these things. And so I'm at EMS one day. I remember exactly where I was. I was going up the stairwell at headquarters, and about 3:30 in the afternoon, and Christina calls. And so I answer the phone, and instantly I know something's wrong, because her voice is like 4 clicks above where it normally is. And she just starts off. Now, I want you to remember, at this point, we have 3 kids. I think 2 of them were still in diapers, and Connor was probably just barely, we had them all really close together. And so that means that Christina would have come home, picked the girls up, and would have had 3 girls, and she is sobbing and crying and scared on the phone. I couldn't understand what she was saying, but I knew I had to get to Georgetown. And so I drove from downtown Austin. On the way up there, she finally tells me, she relates that she had gotten home and the door we was going into was kicked open. And as she walked into the house was trashed and everything was torn up. And so I'm calling friends of mine who are with law enforcement in Georgetown, and they're beating me there. And they were calling me saying, nobody's in the house, everything is safe. And so we get there, and Georgetown PD is there. And they did a great job. They're doing fingerprints and all this other stuff. And we're looking through, and they're saying, what's gone? And I'm looking, I'm saying, that there may be some cheap jewelry out of Christina's jewelry box that's gone, but the TV was there. Not that we had a nice TV at all. We couldn't afford a nice TV, but they didn't take it. And he said, do you keep anything in your sock drawer? And I said, why do you ask? He said, because people always keep their valuables in the sock drawer. And I was like, yeah, I had $4,200 in cash in there. He said, well, it's gone. So what do you mean it's gone? He said, well, go check. And I went in there, and actually in the sock drawer, it's gone. And they had actually rifled through all the drawers of the dressers. So this is a freebie. If you keep expensive stuff in the sock drawer, don't do that. That's the first place they look. Apparently, we're not very sneaky. I thought I was being sneaky, right? And so I don't really have any issue, So I call my chief and said, hey, chief, this is what happened. We got the house broken into, and one of the things they got was that $4,200 in cash. And he goes, okay. He said, listen, we'll work through this. And talked to them the next week, and they said, fact of the matter is, you're responsible for the money. And of course, I will go to my homeowner's insurance, and they're only good to $500. And I said, but it was $4,200. Yes. And everybody that comes in here says there was $10,000 that was stolen in cash. And so unless you have a special rider, they don't cover that. Go back to EMS and say, man, the best I can do is $500. They said, well, we'll have to do payroll deductions until you pay us back. And I thought, that's no big deal. That's no big deal. The next week, I get my pay stub, and it's $0. And I call and I say, what in the world? Well, we told you we'd do this through payroll deduction, but I didn't know all at the same time. I mean, we still have to live, and they're like, we're sorry, but that's the instructions we got. And I said, I don't think that's the instructions you got. But here's the end result, is that we had nothing. We didn't have any money, and I've got 3 little girls. And we didn't have anything in savings. We had stuff that was coming up. Thankfully, Christina had just been to the grocery store, and so we were good, and she got paid the next Friday. We were on alternating pay weeks that week. Got paid the next Friday. So we sort of get through that. Again, I was put in a position where I could not care for my family, that we had to make some significant changes because like during that period of time, there's things like the cable got shut off, and we had to go, deal with the devil, or not the devil, the electric company, and try to work out a deal with them. And so we were able to do that. And thankfully, it was only about a week, but it hurt us for like 6 months. I mean, it was just, all the time, just my whole check is just gone. And we struggled, and the girls struggled, and Christine and I were at each other's throat, and it was a horrible period of time. But I still didn't learn my lesson. Because once we got everything straightened up, I didn't make any changes to what we were doing. We were attending church. We were faithfully serving. We were doing all of that stuff. But we still hadn't learned our lesson about what it meant to be obedient with the gifts that God had given us. A couple of months after we sort of get it straightened out, payday rolls around. I go to the ATM. Now I get like $60 a week, because we were walking in tall cotton. And I go to the ATM, and I put the card in, and I punch in the number, and it says insufficient funds. So I take the card out. I do my best to put money on it by swiping it on my leg, and I stick it back in, and it kicks it back out and says insufficient funds. And so my first response is what? Christina has messed this up somehow. And so I call Christina and I start off again, what in the world are you doing? You're spending all our money and you blah, 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 just really nasty and ugly. And she tells me, no, I haven't done anything. Everything's exactly the same. There should be money in there. I don't know what's going on, nothing special. And, she's instantly on the defensive and I am instantly a butthead. Yes, I'm a butthead to her, just horrible to her. And I can't believe what's going on. And by that, we don't bank at Frost Bank by then. We had moved to a local bank in Georgetown. And I go to the local bank at Georgetown. I said, what in the world is going on? I don't understand what you're doing. What have you messed up on my account? And they said, well, sir, you've been making daily $500 withdrawals from ATMs all over the city of Austin. I said, I am not. They said, yes, you are. Here they are. You were at the Arboretum. You were over at the ATM by RBI. You were in South. Ma'am, I haven't been to any of those places. I have not been anywhere like that. And she said, yes, you have. We can see it right here. They even used your PIN number. I did not do that. Well, guess what was in my sock drawer in addition to $4,200? The debit card with the PIN number stuck right on top of it, the extra debit card. And I said, well, surely you guys can go look at the cameras on the ATMs. And she gave me this little tidbit of information. Most of those cameras don't work. They're just there for show. I get home, and now we have less than nothing. I failed to mention that the last time when the EMS thing happened, we had gone through and we cleaned out. I don't know, man, I hope we're not the only family that's done this. We cleaned out the ashtray from all the coins. We searched through the laundry room for all the missing quarters. We dug through the seat backs and all that stuff. We were able to get some money together then. We've already done that. And so Christina gets home. She goes, what's going on? I said, honey, we don't have anything. And as a matter of fact, I'm sitting there watching the bank, and we're having all these checks for the electric bill and for the cable bill and for car payments that are all getting bounced because there's absolutely nothing there. And so it's not that we have nothing, we have less than nothing. And by now, we're on a 2-week pay cycle. It's 2 weeks before we're going to get paid again. And we have nothing. I mean, nothing. And this time I wasn't mad. I'm just sitting down and thinking, I am a failure. Because my kids might have to go hungry. Because I've not done what I was supposed to do. And I remember I was sitting on the couch, and I remember her sitting on the floor, and we're just quiet because we literally have no idea what to do. Because we didn't even have the change out of the couch to rely on. She had not been to the grocery store because she would typically go on Saturday at payday. And we had nothing. We had sent the girls to bed early because we had grown-up stuff to do. And I become aware of them walking down the hall in their little Ariel nightgown, Cinderella nightgowns. And they're carrying their piggy banks. And Connor walks up and says, here, Daddy, you can have my money. And all 3 of the girls handed me their piggy banks. And I was completely, that just did it for me. We opened the piggy banks, and we had $3.27. In 2 weeks. Friends, I want to tell you that's the best 2 weeks of my life. The cable got shut off, which is one of the best things that ever happened to us. We played board games and did stuff with the girls. We went for walks. Christina is an absolute magician in the kitchen. She took the $3 and went to the store and somehow came home with food for 2 weeks. We ate a lot of pancakes and a lot of rice and a lot of beans for the next couple of weeks. And it was awesome. But I knew that there was something I was not doing. We didn't have a dime in savings. We barely made it from check to check. As a matter of fact, a lot of times there was no check to check. We had credit cards, but they were maxed. We were barely making the minimums, and so we couldn't even go to the store at this point and charge groceries. And they're all calling. I was so thankful when the phone got shut off. I'm going to be honest with you. And I went into my little office, and I sat down, and I started trying to figure out where the money was going. And I couldn't figure out where it was. I mean, I'm labeling everything out, and I'm going through, and I've got this spreadsheet going, and we're just in the red. And I am frustrated. I don't know what it is we're doing wrong. And so we go to bed that night, and of course, I am not in a good place because I am scared, and I'm worried, and I know that I'm failing. And Christina, we're laying there in bed, and Christina says, hey, they were having a book sale at work today. And a lot of times at the St. David's facilities, they'll have a bookseller that comes in and you can buy these books. And she said, I bought a book. And I said, what in the world were you thinking? We don't have money to be buying a book. You can't be buying a book. She goes, well, I thought this one would really help us. And I said, I don't care what book you have. It's not going to help. And she handed me Dave Ramsey's Total Money Makeover. And I said, what is this? What kind of nut job is Dave Ramsey? I'd never heard of this guy before. I said, Money Makeover, I guarantee you at some point he's going to want us to send him $99.95 so he can send us a packet or some mess like that. And she said, you know what, I thumbed through it and I thought just kind of where we were that we ought to look at this and can we just read it? And so we started reading it that night. I read the whole thing cover to cover that night. And it wasn't ever about necessarily the money. And he talked about money, but he was talking about how we honor and dishonor God with what we do with our resources. And it's like every page had my picture on it. We were up to our knickers in debt. But I want you to hear, we were just like everybody else. I was not doing anything that I thought was a bad decision at the time. If we need a car, we go finance it because we certainly don't have the money to buy one. And while you're financing, get the nicest. Get credit cards because that's what you do. You don't have enough money, you go charge on a credit card because we can make the minimum payments and don't worry about savings. You don't need a savings account. Why? Because you have a credit card. And I'm reading through what Dave Ramsey's talking about. I'm thinking, man, everything he's talking about is exactly what I'm doing wrong. Everything. And so I go back into my office, and Dave Ramsey had said to tithe. I said, well, whatever. We can't do that. We don't even have enough money to pay the light bill. I can't believe he wants me to tithe. That's just stupid. And so I go in and I sit down and I've got my budget going up and I'm trying to work it and I'm thinking, you know what, I need to tithe. I mean, that's something I need to do. So that ends up on the line down here. And being sort of an Excel whiz, I have all the cells formatted where if I'm the negative, it shows red and all this other stuff. And no matter what I did to these numbers up here, the tithe was always in the red. It was always in the red. And I worked that around, and I kept working. I said, it just doesn't work. And this went on for a couple of days, and I'm struggling with this, and I'm just really trying to reach this, and nothing's getting better. Christine and I are at each other's throat. I mean, we've got some money now. We're past the 2 weeks. We're trying to finally starting to get built back up, but it's just killing me because we are not making any changes. And so I'm praying. I had a couple of guys at the church praying with me, and they had been speaking truth into my life for a while, but I just kept on thinking they don't understand my situation. They don't, because that kept on saying tithe first, and I appreciate that. Oh, ye with lots of money. I'm not that guy. You don't understand. Things get shut off at my house if I do something like that. So I go into the computer one evening, I'm sitting there, and I took the tithe line from the bottom to the top. And all of a sudden, it was something else down here that was red. And I had just this flash of peace that I hadn't known that I had ever had before. It's still red down here. Make no mistake about it. It's red. And I'm not talking about excess money. I'm talking about the light bill and phone bill and gasoline and food. It's red. And I call Christina, and Christina, one of her great failings, I think, is that she trusts me implicitly with all this stuff. And I call her in, and I said, sweetheart, I've really been praying about this, and I think that we've got to start tithing. And she said, I think the exact same thing. I didn't know how to tell you. And I wrestled with this, and I said, I'm not exactly sure how to do this. I guess we'll get the bills paid, and then we'll go write a tithe check. And she goes, I'm not sure that's how we're supposed to do it. I said, what do you mean? She goes, I don't think that's how we're supposed to do it. And so what we did, because I knew that I would humanly fail, I didn't think that I could make it from Friday to Sunday. Payday on Friday to writing the tithe check on Sunday. So I went into my bank's website and I created Crestview Baptist Church as a vendor. And I set up an automatic bill pay to Crestview. So if that money was gone before we spent everything else. And friends, I will tell you something. I remember specifically sitting, little bitty office, 200 or 140 square foot little bitty office at the house, sitting there with my finger on the mouse, with the mouse right over the submit button on the bank bill pay thing, and I had to pray to make my finger move that far. Because in my mind, I didn't know how this was going to work out, because again, there was a side of me that was saying, you know what, you're getting ready to fail your kids again. Because if you send this tithe away, you know you're going to have stuff get shut off or can't afford this or whatever. You know you're going to fail your kids again. And the other side is saying, you know what, you need to put the first things first. Click, and it was done. And friends, can I tell you right now that was, that was 16 years ago. And to this day, that's still how we tithe, is through our bank bill pay. It's the first thing that goes out. And so I sat back and I waited for the world to cave in, because I saw those bills, and there's still a bunch of them that are in red. And do you know that we were never again overdrawn? Not one time. It's red, but somehow the money was there. I didn't get a big raise. We didn't have any more money. Nothing else was changing in our lives. But somehow, our needs were met. And I would just watch this, and I'm sitting there going, what in the world? I don't understand, because it's still red, and I put the numbers in, but there's still money there. And then all of a sudden, we have just a little bit, not a lot extra, we got a little bit extra, and we start putting some money in savings. And we start working the Dave Ramsey plan. And I remember we had this $200 Bell's credit card or some little card like that. I want to tell you what, the celebration at our house the day that we paid that dude off, man, was overwhelming. We actually had pancakes with bacon that day. But then all of a sudden it started to generate this excitement. And the girls were, all of a sudden, the Walmart trips, and I love my girls, but they were girls. Every Walmart was, can I have? But they saw Christina with her little foldy file of money. Dave Ramsey, you do the envelopes, and all of a sudden they're participating with Christina in the envelope process. My girl's in college, and they're doing that at college, living on a budget. And all of a sudden, it just started getting more exciting and more exciting. We start seeing these bills paid off. And again, Now, I will tell you, and I told my pastor this, and he said, no, that's not the way it works. I'm telling you, my truck got better gas mileage. I'm not trying to kid. I believe God didn't give us more money, but he caused all these other things to happen. Our electricity bill started going down. We started getting a break on the cable bill. And, you see what I'm saying? And God was just so sufficient. Well, there comes a day, I'm at EMS. It's a Saturday. And I remember exactly where I was. I was on a call with Medic 20. We were up off of Dessau Road. I'm starting to ring a little bit back here. We're up on Dessau Road, and it's a home that we had been to before. There's a very sick 20-year-old cystic fibrosis, and we would go there once every couple of weeks. But we knew him. And I'm there with the crew, and the crew has him all packaged up. And my phone rings. Now, I don't typically, used to anyway, if the phone rang on a call from one of the girls or Christina, I wouldn't answer, and they would understand I was on a call. But this time, we were sort of at the place in the call that I went ahead and answered. I remember where I was in their living room. The screen doors right there. They had a covered front porch with a wheelchair ramp that went down. The front porch was covered with that green corrugated, you know what I'm talking about? And I'm sitting there. I answered the phone, and she said, honey, and it's got tone of voice again. Something has scared her. And I said, what? I mean, everything was going so well. I said, what? She goes, we got something from the IRS. I said, what? She said, a check. Don't touch it. It's a trick. Don't touch it. She said, what do you mean? I said, I don't care what it is. If the IRS sent us a check, they have made a mistake. You put that thing on the counter, and all of a sudden my heart's going, boo. Because there's a trick here. They're trying to lure us. And I said, don't touch it. And I'm sitting there, and I said, what does it say? She goes, it doesn't say anything. It's just a check. I said, well, for crying out loud, don't mess with anything. And it's Saturday. I remember the next morning, Sunday, I get home. It's on the island. And I'm like walking around it like this, kind of looking at it, and, I kind of peek at it and go, oh, man, I don't know what in the world they're doing. And I'm sitting there looking at it, and, I said, there's nothing else. There's not a letter? She said, no, it's just a check. And I said, well, I don't have any idea. And so I have to go all the way through Sunday because apparently the government doesn't work on Sunday. And I get to Monday morning, and finally they answer. And, I was on hold for hours and hours and hours, and they said, what's going on? Yes, sir, how can we help you? I said, well, ma'am, y'all sent us a check. Oh, well, very nice. Is it not the right amount? I said, I don't think you should be sending us a check. She goes, well, let me look up your account. And so I give her all the information, and she goes through, and she goes, yes, sir. It turns out that you have made some miscalculations in your tax returns, and you have overpaid us significantly, and we sent that check back to you. And I said, ma'am, y'all have made a mistake. Mr. Wright. We're the IRS. We don't make mistakes. I said, well, what am I supposed to do with that? She goes, sir, that's your money. Cash the check, and with apologies from the IRS for overcalculations. The check was $4,200, the exact amount that had been stolen out of my dresser drawer over a year before. Friends, I have to tell you something. When God says He is sufficient, He is sufficient. I will tell you that we dove headfirst into Dave Ramsey. It's been a tremendous experience for all of us. We are in a position now, so many years later that, you guys probably heard me talk about, I think I talked about this a couple weeks ago, is that money is no longer evil to us. It's just a tool. That we get to make decisions on money, and money doesn't make decisions for us. And I will tell you, all we did was obey. We didn't do anything else. Take your Bibles out for me. Let's walk through this real quick. I want you to turn over to Matthew 14. We're going to do this very quickly, because I learned a lesson in this whole process. And friends, it's something that I told you last week. You're going to hear me saying a lot today. The issue with our money in the right household was never, ever about the money. It was never, ever about the money. Money was just the window through which God allowed us to see his provision for us. When money was just the window through which God allowed us to see that when we are obedient, God does amazing things. Matthew 14, we're going to start in verse 13, and this is a passage I think that we're all familiar with. This is the parable, or not the parable, but it's a story, and I believe the incredibly accurate and true story of Jesus feeding the 5,000. And just so we're clear, when we say 5,000, that was 5,000 men. Best estimates are there were 15 to 20,000 people there that day. If you found Matthew 14, say, I have it. Now, when Jesus heard this, what Jesus heard is that John the Baptist, his protege, the voice of the one calling from the desert, Jesus had just gotten word that Herod had beheaded him and had his head delivered to his stepdaughter on a platter. And Jesus had initially, when he heard this, you guys just think, as somebody who is your protege, somebody that... John the Baptist was Jesus' oldest living acquaintance. Because if you'll remember, whenever Mary was pregnant and she walked into the house where Elizabeth was pregnant with John the Baptist leapt in the womb because he recognized Jesus even as a fetus, and I believe that Jesus recognized him. So he was absolutely, other than his mother, his oldest acquaintance on earth. And so to hear that John the Baptist, one who is the voice from the desert, who is foretelling the coming of Jesus Christ the Savior, when Jesus hears that John the Baptist has been beheaded, there's two emotions for him. First of all, the emotion is a very human emotion that was, one of my great friends is gone. But the second emotion is this, is that the clock has started. That this was foretold, and that Jesus knew that John the Baptist being beheaded meant that they were headed towards the cross. Now, when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them, and he healed their sick. Excuse me. Now, when it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the day is now over. Send the crowds away to go into the villages and buy food for themselves." How would you rate their situation? So you've got some disciples. You've got about 50, let's go on the low end, 15,000 people there. And the people are hungry. How would you rate their situation? Doable or impossible? It's impossible. Their situation was impossible. Now, what I want you to hear is that what we view as impossible, God views as opportunity. And that's the lesson we have to learn, is that when we see something as being impossible, that God sees the opportunity to show his glory, to show his power, and to show his dominion over everything in our lives. And the disciples and Jesus had a completely different view of the situation in front of them. The disciples saw something impossible, and when they saw something impossible, and let me see if this sounds familiar, they saw an impossible situation, so their first response was to turn their back on it. If my situation is impossible, then the best way for me to deal with it is by ignoring it. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Or is it just me? And they wanted to ignore it. Send the people away. This is nothing that we can do. Jesus had a different view of the situation. First, he saw an opportunity in this impossible situation to minister to 15,000 people. Jesus inherently and always wants to meet our needs. There is never a circumstance in your life in which Jesus does not want to meet your needs, no matter what the circumstance is. And again, if money is your circumstance, can I just remind you, it's not about the money. Money just happens to be the window through which you're seeing God do his work. The second circumstance that Jesus saw was he saw an opportunity to grow the faith of the disciples. He saw the opportunity to minister to the disciples. The disciples didn't need food. They probably had their own food. They were used to following Jesus to these desolate places. But he saw a way that he could develop their faith. And Jesus says what we should all consider to be an unusual thing to the disciples. He says, they need not go away. You give them something to eat. Now, I want you to remember, and I want you to think about this. Jesus did not say, I'll handle it. He did not say, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. Instead, he said, you do it. Now, up until this point in Jesus' ministry, Jesus had done all the heavy lifting. The disciples and the apostles were just in the background watching him do what it is that he does. They were observers and not participants in ministry. It's at this point in Jesus' ministry where he starts allowing the disciples to share in the glory of not observing, but share in the glory of participating, being an active participant in the ministry. Their response was our response, okay? Jesus says, they say, send them away. Jesus says, no, you feed them. And their response is our response. We have only 5 loaves and 2 fish. Now, that response is simply this. It's one of, Jesus, apparently, you don't understand my situation. Apparently, you have not seen all the people. And all we have is 2 fish and some bread, Jesus. Do I always have to tell you what's going on? Come on now, Jesus, let's kind of keep up. You see, they begin arguing with him and saying, surely, Jesus, you don't understand my situation. Surely, Jesus, you would not ask me to tithe if you truly understand the state of my finances. Surely, Jesus, you would not ask me to invest in my marriage if you saw the way my wife treated me. Surely, Jesus, you would not want me to spend more time with my kids because they hate me as it is. You must not understand my situation, Jesus, or you wouldn't ask me to do this. See, we're exactly like those guys. We think we have to explain things to God, right? Our prayer life, this is a shin kicking coming at you. We spend more time in our prayer life telling God our situation because we somehow think that maybe he doesn't know. Oh God, Granny is sick. She's in the hospital. The doctors say, God, and God's not going, well, dude, I am glad you told me because I wasn't aware. Because somehow we think that God is not aware of our situation. Friends, he foresaw your situation. He allows you to be in the situation. You see, I think we need to spend less time explaining our situation to God and more time obeying with what he tells us to do in that situation. Can you imagine just how much better it would be if we would just obey? You do it. What do you think Jesus thought when they said we only have 5 loaves and 2 fishes? And by the way, they weren't even their loaves and fishes. They apparently bullied some little kid and took it from him. Hey, kid, give me your food. Yeah, I don't know if that's what happened, but there's this one kid. Now, what in the world is a kid doing out there? I think he was he was a little moneymaker, entrepreneur, or whatever that word is, and he is probably out there selling some fish sandwiches. Y'all hungry? I got fish. You know what I'm saying? And so they go over there, and it's not even their stuff. They don't even offer Jesus what's theirs. And what they offered Jesus had absolutely no physical possible way to meet the needs. Now, we would think, now I just want you to put yourself in Jesus' position real quick. You're not in Jesus' position, but I want you to think that you're in charge that day, okay? You're not Jesus, but you're in charge. And you tell the disciples, you feed them, and they bring to you 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Our response is, are you an idiot? How dare you come up and do this to me, 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And you know, the thing is that we would be offended by what somebody brings. Friends, can I tell you, Jesus is never, ever offended by what you offer him. Ever. As long as it's done how? In faith. Jesus, this is all I have to give. My barrel is empty. I don't have any more money. I don't have any more patience. I don't have any more time. I don't have any more love. I'm just going to be able to give you this much. And Jesus goes, I can work with that. You know what? You bring what you have to Jesus, and he'll say, I can work with that. I can do amazing things with that. Point number 1 is this. In every aspect of your life, start with what you have. It's not about the money. Will you say that? It's not about the money. But here's something that I hear on a regular basis. I don't ask, and I was thinking about this yesterday. When people come into and just stick with me, okay? I've told you this before. When people come into my office and they're facing some life crisis, I always ask two questions. How's your prayer life? How's your Bible study? Now, I view what we do with our giving and with our money as a spiritual discipline. That's it. It's a spiritual discipline. Bible study is a spiritual discipline. Prayer life is a spiritual discipline. Your service is spiritual discipline. And I got to thinking, if I really am who I say I am, I should also ask the third question, how's your prayer life? How's your Bible study? And are you tithing? Now, let's just be up front. I would never meet with anybody again. I'm going to have to visit with the elders about this. This is something that keeps twisting my mind, because if we're going to treat it like it really is, we're going to put money in its place, then, this is from Stephen. I told you I would respond, so going home at lunch. Y'all give the Lord glory for that. Amen? Amen. And at the hospital, I think lunch is like 8 o'clock in the evening or something like that. So. But instead, we should be obedient with whatever it is that we have. If we have just very little, then we just say, Lord, this is what I'm obedient with. I have people in my office, and they say this, because at some point it comes up, well, I can't tithe right now because I don't make enough money. As soon as I make some more money, pay off some bills, I'll start tithing. I said, you have missed the boat. Because you don't give God the tailings. He doesn't bless the tailings. Do y'all know that? If you're waiting every week to see how your bills come up to tithe and are wondering why your life continues to head downhill, it's because you're giving God the tailings. Now, I'm not just a preacher telling you that. I'm a guy that lived that. That's my experience. And I believe that God allowed me to have that experience to be able to share with you, so perhaps you can avoid that experience. You don't give him the tailings. Or then they'll say this, well, is it okay if I tithe 5%? No, because that's not a tithe. A tithe is 10%. Well, I just can't afford it. I can't afford to tithe. My response, while somewhat cliche, is you can't afford not to tithe. Because if you expect God to bless you, and by the way, I will never teach you that God blesses money by giving money. That's not biblical. Nowhere in the Bible does it say that. It just says that he blesses. I will tell you the blessing that I got out of my experience from tithing is that I'm still married, and I'm not making a joke. I'm telling you right now, if things had to change, I don't see how Christine and I would still be together. And that the blessing that I received out of that is the best marriage, I'm going to say better than anybody in this room. Amen? High five, baby. I'm being facetious with that, but what I'm telling you is that the blessing I have is a marriage and wonderful kids. We're not rich. We're a preacher and a public servant. That's. But man, I am so blessed. It's not about the money. It doesn't matter where you are in life. It doesn't matter what your situation is. It doesn't matter what you're going through. Follow his instructions. What were his instructions? What did Jesus say right after this? He says this, bring it to me. We got 15,000, 5 loaves and 2 fish. Bring it to me. Friends, we are invited by Jesus Christ himself to bring everything we have to him. To bring our blessings to him, but to also bring our trials to him. Marriage on the rocks, Jesus says what? Bring it to me. Finances in the toilet, Jesus says what? Bring it to me. Struggling with your kids, Jesus says what? Bring it to me. And so that means that we have to do what? We make a decision. At that point, we have 2 choices. Nah, I'm going to keep on trying to do it the way I've been doing it. It'll work out. Or to be obedient. Point number 2 is this. Obey with what you have. Simple obedience. There is blessing in simply obeying. Because see, when we obey with whatever we have, when we bring our situation to Jesus, He infuses the supernatural into our issues. Then He ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass, and taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, He looked up to heaven and said a blessing. Then He broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. You see, when we obey what Jesus tells us to do, He supernaturally influences our situation. If we don't obey what Jesus tells us to do, there is no supernatural infusion. Black and white. Can I just tell you right now, can I just share with you that if you have unrepentant sin in your life and are questioning why you don't have the spiritual life that other people talk about, it's no mystery. God does not bless sin. That was an amen moment, by the way. God blesses obedience. When God instructs you and commands you, and by the way, I know that this is an unpopular subject. I absolutely believe, and I believed this before I was a preacher, by the way, we are commanded to give the first 10% to God. It's an Old Testament principle. You can go find it in Malachi 3:10. You can also find it in Matthew 23:23. I remember preaching a similar message one day, and a guy met me at the front right after church and began to rail on me. Jesus did not command us to tithe. I said, man, Matthew 23:23 says give 10% like you always do. And he said to me, but he only said it once. I'm not kidding. I said, dude, I live my life differently. I only have to hear it once from Jesus. But there are people who make the argument, well, he didn't mention it over, if it was really that important, he mentioned it over and over and over. No, I think it was important. He thought that you would actually hear his words the first time and just obey. That's his expectation. And so I believe that tithing, the first 10%, is a command. We obey with that command. Now, there's something that we have to have in order to obey the way they're supposed to obey, and that's faith. For you to be obedient, now I want you to hear me. For you to be obedient with whatever it is that God has given you, you have to have faith that God will control it, that God will have His influence in it. Now, when I was sitting in front of that computer screen and the numbers were read, I didn't know how that was going to work out. I had faith, and I will tell you, it was thin. My faith was thin about this. Because my human eyes, the numbers are numbers. 1 + 1 = 2. Amen? It just does. And red is red. I don't know how, but God, I'm going to trust you. And faith that God is in control leads to the obedience of the mouse click. And then we get to sit back and watch what God does. But that only happens if we have faith. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for. This is Hebrews 11:1. By the way, this is one of those verses you should memorize. The conviction of things not seen. That's the essence of faith. It's the assurance. The assurance. Faith means I don't doubt that God is going to handle it. I don't have to know how He's going to do it. Friends, do you understand that? If we understand how God is going to do it, then it's not faith. If we can see exactly how God is going to rescue us, then we don't actually need God to begin with, because then we can actually follow those steps ourselves. Faith is being okay with, you know what, I don't have to understand, I just have to do what? Obey. I just have to obey. Hebrews 11:6, and without faith, it is impossible to please Him. Can we just marinate in that for just a minute? We want to hear what words from God? Well done, good and faithful servant. It is impossible to hear those words without having faith in Him. We will not hear the words, well done, good and faithful servant, unless we trust Him. Without faith, it is impossible to please God, to please Him. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. And friends, can I tell you one more time? It's not about the money. By the way, with the 15,000 people, it was never about the food. You think God always had a plan for that? Absolutely. And can we be okay with the fact that God had put them in that situation? That seems a little weird, doesn't it? God put them in that situation, led those people to be out there among them, led them away from town. They didn't have Minute Marts or 7-Elevens back then on every street corner. There was certainly no delivery. If they didn't have it with them, they didn't eat. Could God have intervened and influenced every single person to take a knapsack with a sandwich in it before they went out to chase Jesus? Absolutely. God allowed them to be in that position. Why? So we could see amazing supernatural things happen through him. John 15:10 is a hard passage. But John 15:10 shows us that there is a result of faith which leads to obedience. And it is this: if you keep my commandments, notice the if you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love. In other words, you will rest in the love of Jesus, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be full. Follow the progression. Faith leads to obedience, and obedience leads to joy. And not just a thin joy, but a full joy. I will tell you that one of the joys that I have is our finances. Now, I don't get joy out of it, but I love the fact, y'all are going to think I'm crazy, I go in and examine our finances about every 3 to 6 months. Because everything is so automatic, and I trust God. We've worked very hard to get there. But I figure the less influence I have over that and the more influence I give to God, and I'm not telling you take your hands off and do that. Be obedient and then watch God do what he does. It is out of this joy that God amazes us. Look what happened. And they all ate, but they didn't just eat. Friends, can you hear me? They didn't all just get a bite of fish and a bite of bread. They all, 15,000 people, 5 loaves of bread, 2 fish, 15,000 people, they all ate, but I want you to underline your Bible, what? And were satisfied. Now, it's important to note, it doesn't say they were stuffed to the gills with food. They were satisfied. You see, I think that one of the challenges that we have is to no longer strive to be stuffed to the gills, but to be satisfied with what God provides for us. To be satisfied in what God is doing. Instead, we look at the green grass on the other side of the fence and think, you know what? I want God to bless me like that. Well, that's not what God has chosen to do in your life. God has you where he wants you, and this is a great place for you to be satisfied. That means you should be amazed. Third point. Be amazed with what you have. When we step out in faith and leave it to him to fill in the gap. And by the way, that's what faith is. It's recognizing that there's a gap between your abilities and your needs, and that you're going to trust God to fill in that gap. Can I tell you that one of the most difficult things we have to do ever is to step across that gap? It's to step from this place to that place because there's something in the middle that we can't control, we can't define, we can't identify. But God says, you know what? That's where I operate. That's where my blessing is most relevant to you, is in what you can't do. 5 loaves, 2 fish, 15,000 people. They all ate and were satisfied. And then they picked up 12 baskets of leftovers. Can y'all do the math for me on that? Let me explain the math to you. There wasn't 100 people out there. It wasn't 10 people. But God took a situation that no matter what we would think or how we would view it was so incredibly impossible that the only thing those people could do is say, God did this. What would happen in your life if you looked at the impossible and gave God thanks for the impossible. I said, God, I am so thankful that you allowed me to be in this position. You know, he's Jesus, right? Right? He's Jesus, which means he's God. Do y'all recognize what Jesus didn't do? Hey, guys, you feed the people. Hey, Jesus, there's only 5 loaves and 2 fishes. He didn't just go, done, I fed them. He didn't do that, did he? He said, you do it. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. You see, sometimes he allows us to be in a position because of our disobedience. You see, we have opportunities at every single step along the way in all of our decisions and all of our situations to turn towards him. But too often, we continue to rely on our own abilities, our own intelligence, our own vision, our own goals, our own thoughts. And God just keeps saying, you know what, you can keep on doing what you're doing, but I'm that way. Until we get to a point where we have an impossible situation and we don't have any more tricks. Now, we would say, told you so. You had your chance. You ignored me every time. If you'd just done what I asked you the first time, you wouldn't be, you know what? God doesn't chide us like that. He rebukes us, but he doesn't chide us. But as soon as we get to that end point and we see it as impossible and we turn towards God, God says, you know, I'm still right here. I've not gone anywhere. But God, it's impossible. Yeah, for you, it is. But that's why I'm here. God says, I deal in the impossible. That's what I do. But see, I think we also, in this story, we miss the story. We miss the message. It's not about the money. It's not about the food. It's about Jesus showing us just a glimpse of the things to come. It's about Jesus showing us, you know what, I'm going to amaze you with just a couple baskets of food. I'm going to meet their needs. I'm going to meet their hunger. But watch what I do about your sin. You think this was something? You haven't seen anything yet. He said, because the impossible task is for you to deal with your sin on your own. The impossible task is for you to deal with your depression or your guilt or your anxiety or your relationship or your finances or your marriage. It's impossible to, watch what I do with your sin. You see, I believe that the feeding of the 5,000 was our first beautiful look at what Jesus would do on the cross for us. That he would take an impossible situation, our sinful nature. He would say, give it to me. That he who was without sin became sin so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. So what are you dealing with today? Not about the money. I want to invite you today to join me in a few moments of prayer. And then I'm going to invite you forward today. I've never said that before. I'm going to invite you forward. That perhaps what you're bringing today is your money situation. And again, it's just a spiritual discipline. Maybe you're struggling with Bible study or prayer, you're struggling at work, or you're struggling with your children or your marriage or whatever it may be. I'm going to invite you to bring that today. We will have enough elders and deacons and pastors here to pray over you. Perhaps you don't want us to pray, you just want to be at the front, just praying and say, God, I'm bringing it to you today. It begins with this admission, friends. You see, I believe that when those disciples brought those 5 loaves and 2 fish, that they were saying, we're broken, we're sick, we're tired, we're hungry, and we're incapable. And with that acknowledgement, Jesus says, bring it to me. I'm going to spend a few moments in prayer. I just encourage you this morning. Say, God, give me the strength to bring it to you. Help grow my faith so I can be obedient in how I step out for you, how I honor you with every part of my life. Jeff will begin singing here in a couple of minutes as the Spirit moves him. At any point, you're welcome to be at the front with Pastor Derek and I or other deacons or elders so we can pray over you. The front is open for you also, as is the Lord's table in different places around the room. And Jesus says, bring it to me. I will pray. Then it's up to you. I've done my part. Now it's your turn. God, we love you. We thank you for how sufficient you are, just for the lessons that you give us. That you will never leave us nor forsake us. And Father, I pray that you are pleased with my offering this morning. And Father, I pray that the people today will see now it's up to them. That you are waiting. That you have offered the invitation, bring it to me. And it's up to them to step out. Lord, thank you for meeting us where we are. In Jesus' name.